Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. It's been my experience that men are far more likely to jump out of an airplane, or to run with the bulls of Pamplona, or to scale a mountain without safety equipment than we are to confront another man about his misogynistic behavior. Oof. Ooh, that's the gut punch of truth, fellas. My own gut has been punched because for me, for many years of my life, that was absolutely true. I would have much rather jumped out of an airplane or run with the bulls of Pamplona. Maybe not so much scaling a mountain without safety equipment. That's a little too risky for my taste, but I would have much rather done those other things than to confront a man about his misogynistic behavior because the honest truth was I didn't have the confidence. I didn't know what ground I stood upon. I didn't have the confidence to deal with that person's resistance or to deal with their blowback or their anger or to deal with the idea of maybe ruining the moment or being a buzzkill and losing social capital or even facing the risk of violence. Who the hell knows how a guy's going to respond, right? But the fact of the matter is, gentlemen, we are here to live the great man within us. I have a very clear vision of who my great man is. He doesn't stand for that shit. So today's conversation is about how to call out other men with confidence about their misogynistic behavior. And so where we're going to go in today's episode is I'm going to share with you the definition of misogyny. I'm going to share with you 4 guiding principles on how to handle situations like this. And I'm going to share with you 4 stories, real life stories from my life where I've been a leader in an environment where I had to correct misogyny, where I've been amongst a group of friends, where I've been a person with no power confronting a man with all of the power in the room. Real life situations with very different dynamics, power dynamics and social structures where I have addressed misogyny in a variety of ways in the event that it will help you when you find yourself in that situation in the future. So let's first start with the definition of misogyny. The textbook definition of misogyny is the dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. The definition of misogyny is dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. Now, we're going to spend the majority of our episode presuming that the men that you are confronting fall into that third and final category of ingrained prejudice against women. We all have ingrained prejudices, whether we're aware of it or not. Our upbringings, what we've read about, the TV shows that we watch, the patriarchal structure that we're a part of, all of that stuff affects how we show up with women, the conversations that we have about women, whether in front of women or behind closed doors. Of course, there are men who fall into the first 2 categories, that they dislike women, they have contempt for women. Those are deeply rooted. But I'm thinking, in my experience, the majority of these situations occur, I would say in my personal experience, 90 to 95% of the situations where if I've had to confront misogyny is not because men completely disliked or have contempt for women, but it's because of this blind prejudice that we're not aware of. And until we correct it, then we can't do anything about it. So I want to share with you 4 stories from my real life experiences of where I've confronted misogyny. And then I will close with the 4 guiding principles. I think it's helpful to give you the stories first because it puts some real meat on the bones around why the principles matter. So here's the first story. A year ago, at the very beginning of the Great Man Mastermind, we launched in March, 20 guys were about to go on this journey. And I think it was maybe within our first 3 weeks, we went into lockdown and I was looking at doing some programming for our guys virtually to keep us engaged. And so I said, hey guys, Saturday morning, whoever wants to come for this workout, I hired this unbelievable fitness instructor. She's someone whose classes I've taken here in New York City. She's going to do a customized thing for us online. By the way, she used to be a former Laker girl and a New York City dancer. She's amazing. And one of the guys in the group, God bless him for giving us this opportunity. He said, is she going to be wearing clothes? Ha ha ha. I couldn't help myself. And when I saw that pop in the group chat, I was like, shit. Because now this thing is lingering in here and we're at the very formative stages right? Like the guys don't know each other from anyone. We've just gotten in this group chat 3 weeks earlier. And this is a moment where we could either, a fork in the road, where I as a leader either condone that behavior by not addressing it, and then it becomes acceptable, or I address it. And I also didn't want this man to feel like a shithead, because he's a good man. I know this guy's heart, right? And I don't want him to feel alienated in this group of other men. So like I had to handle this thing with great man type of awareness. So I took some time, I took a breath, and I didn't take too long because I couldn't let this linger for too long, but I sat down, I kind of cleared out everything, and I said, this is the most important thing I need to address. And I typed in my notes app, this response that until I got it right, I wasn't going to drop it in the group chat. But when it was ready, I said this. I said, gentlemen, I want to address who we want to become as a group of men. And one of the principles that we hold is that we create environments that allow us and those we care about to thrive. And that includes women. We want to be ambassadors of women, champions of women, and want them to feel safe in our spaces. And a big part of that is how we behave when women are not around. And so, while I get the impulse, especially with this beautiful woman who's going to be coming to teach us, recognize that she's going to be stepping into a space where it's all men and what that might bring up for her. And we don't want her to feel any of that weirdness or strangeness. So, can we agree to holding up a higher standard? And like I said, God bless this man for bringing that opportunity to us, because what ended up happening after that was beautiful. There were two or three men in the group who responded, yeah, you know what? That comment rubbed me the wrong way too, but I was afraid to speak up. I didn't know what the situation was here. We're just trying to get to know each other. And, to the brother who just said this, I know that you don't have any ill intention. And the man in the group handled it beautifully too. He said, oh my God, I didn't realize. And here's why I said what I said. I won't let that happen again. Sorry, guys. And fellas, we didn't have to address that shit ever again. Very quickly and swiftly, this group of men knew who we stood for. It was this beautiful coming together, and took a moment that could potentially have divided us. But with that standing up for in that moment actually created a really powerful experience for us to come closer together. And if you saw what I did there, I had to take a break. I had to pause. I had to work through my emotions and then type this thing out first. And also to take into consideration that this was going to happen in a public place in front of this man and a bunch of his other peers, and to want to do so in a way that allowed him to feel like he still had a place. And I did thank him. One of the things I forgot to mention was in my response to him, I said, hey, thank you for giving us this opportunity to actually establish an identity, to have such a beautiful conversation. So I allowed him to feel called forward and welcomed into the group. Situation number 2, this was a social situation. This is a social situation where I didn't know the other man who called forward in the situation. I had just given a presentation at an industry event. This was 2 years ago, and I was still doing conferences and keynote speeches at a women's group. And there was a man in the audience after the presentation was over where he came up to me and he was saying, I really appreciated that presentation. I work with these girls at work, and this girl has this thing, this girl has this other thing. And I looked at him, and he works in this financial services organization. He's a 40-year-old man, and he's referring to these women that he works with as girls. And I stopped him. I said, hey, brother, do you mind if I provide you a reflection on something that you're saying right now that I think could really be like a big moment of elevation here? And so I asked his permission, and he looked at me and said, yeah, sure. What do you got? I said, these women who are grown adults that you are referring to as girls, especially because you work in a male-dominated environment where, they're constantly the outnumbered, you referring to them as girls could feel to them like you don't respect them, like you don't see them as equals. And as other men hear you talking about them as girls, it can entrench that class system potentially, where it's the boys club, the men, and then the girls over there. These are grown women who have earned their stripes in the business. You got to refer to them that way. And to this man's credit, he said, brother, thank you. I absolutely will correct that. It turns out that was a moment where he really gained a lot of respect for me, because he wouldn't let me go after that. And actually, he's one of the men in our community who's one of the most visible guys in our group. And he's one of the guys who calls other men forward regularly. So that's a side effect, is like, you get the right guy who hears the message, he can respect you for giving him a call forward moment. Situation number 3, this was an event where I confronted a man who was in power where I had none. I was at this marketing mastermind a year ago where I was sitting as an attendee, kind of a peon, right? I was a nobody. And there was a man who was giving a marketing presentation, and this guy was like the stallion of the group. And he was the alpha dog. And he had like these marketing tactics. He was kind of the man who was revered, like the headliner, to come in and talk about how he markets. And this audience was a mixed audience. There were men and women. The majority of the audience was men. I think it would say 75% men. And when he was on stage, he used these analogies like, yeah, man, like I'm like a prostitute, you know, like I'll go to the highest bidder or whatever it is. And he also used this analogy of like, hey, it's like being the hot chick at the bar. You know, everybody wants like a piece of you, like that kind of thing. And when he said that stuff, it got laughs from the audience. And I even looked around the audience and women were laughing too. But I couldn't tell if the women were laughing because they didn't want to be othered, because it's uncomfortable to just like sit there with your arms crossed and be seen as like the person who's not down with it. Or maybe they genuinely found it funny. I don't know. But what I do know is I've spoken with enough women in women's groups, women who are constantly outnumbered in like male dominant environments, and they will tell you that it's shit like that that makes them feel so uncomfortable, but they can't confront it, right? They're just trying to fit in and be a part of it. They're dying for other men to actually step forward and to say, guys, can we use better language? And so I found myself with this guy, and he's physically confronting. He's taller than me. He's bigger than me. He's a guy's guy. He's more alpha than I am. And I found that I was in this private moment where, and he's more successful financially than I am. Like, he's just this guy on this pedestal. So everything, like every power position, I felt like this guy kind of had over me. And yet I still felt he needed to hear something. So we were having this coffee along the side, and I spent a few minutes with him about his presentation. I said, hey, brother, I really appreciated the wisdom you dropped about the marketing tactics, and I really am going to be putting some of those into use. Like, you've made a dent in my life, and I wanted to know if you'd be open to hearing a little something that may be triggering for you, that comes from an observation that I made that I think could really help you, especially in future situations. And he hesitated for a moment because it didn't look like he knew whether or not he wanted me to go down that path. And I wasn't going to launch into it without permission. And he was like, okay, yeah, tell me. And I said, man, these analogies that you gave about being a prostitute or being the hot chick at the bar, I've had a chance to speak to a lot of women's groups. Here's what they've told me about stuff like that. And brother, I have no idea. Like, I'm pretty sure that your intentions were never to divide or make anyone feel that way. But impact is much more important than intentions. And if the impact of the women, in the women in the room is that they felt maybe they can't trust you, or maybe they feel like they're like there's something about you that like it's kind of keeping them a distance from you, that may have an effect on future clients or what they say about you when you're not around. But also, like, if you want to create environments where they feel safe, I just need you to know that this isn't doing the trick. And he looked at me and there was like this, I couldn't tell if he let it all the way in, but he thanked me. He was just like, all right, yeah, thanks, man. Like, yeah, thank you. And he walked away. And that was it. And there's no more to that story. I don't know if he went and, told me to go fuck myself under his breath. I don't know if that's changed his life forever or somewhere in between. The most important thing was he heard it from me. And so this last story is about a time I confronted a friend amongst a group of friends. And this was one of the most challenging, we know, right, is to confront your friends, especially the friends who you know that their hearts are in the right place. But like I said at the very beginning of this episode, in misogyny, the definition of it is this ingrained prejudice against women that we sometimes don't know we have, right? Like these blind spots that we have. And so I want to share a story with you about a man who I fucking love. Like, this is a guy I consider a brother, not just a buddy, right? I did that episode recently on Do You Have Buddies or Brothers? This guy's a brother, bona fide brother. And we were sitting around after a meal, sharing stories about how we used to be so stupid, when we were younger, and how we couldn't communicate sexually, and how we used to get, wound up with porn, and just how inept we were in so many ways. And he ends up telling this story where I know his intent was to talk about how stupid he was as a kid, right? As a young adult. I guess he was like in his early 20s. And the story he told was, I'm having sex with this woman in doggy style, and I'm thinking maybe I can have some anal sex with her. So I just kind of like start poking around at her butt, and she's like, hey, what are you doing back there? And I'm just like, shh, shh. And I try to go in a little bit further, and then she like slaps it away and stops me. And he was telling the story to be like, how stupid am I? Like, my communication style was shh. And, we were laughing at that in the moment. But something about that was like, it didn't feel right to me. And I was like, this feels uncomfortable. I don't know exactly what it is about this that's uncomfortable, but I actually let the moment pass and I didn't say anything about it. And I could tell the table felt also uncomfortable, but none of us really like stepped forward and said anything about it. And so when I was driving home from the experience later that day, I recognized, whoa, this was a moment about consent. Like when you're talking about having sex with a woman and going to a place of anal, that's a big moment of consent. That's not just something you do. That's something that requires calibration and consent, verbally or otherwise, right? And when she said, hey, what are you doing? And the shh happened, it was like a shushing her about establishing her boundaries. And I've heard from so many women who have talked about how sometimes they don't have a voice in those moments and have given way to what a guy wants because maybe she's been sexually abused, or maybe she's been taught to give a guy what he wants, or maybe she's been taught that if I don't acquiesce, the guy's going to get violent. So that shushing, even though this man would never do anything violent to a woman, that shushing has implications. And so I sent him a message to him and the other men who were present afterwards. And I said, brother, I got to let you know, man, that story you told yesterday didn't sit well with me. I didn't know what it was. I should have said something in the moment, but here it is. And I'm saying this from a place of calling you forward. And I said everything that I just said to you on this podcast. And I was like, it's time to retire that story, because I know if women heard that, it would make them feel unsafe. And if a younger man heard that and we were laughing at it, he would think that that's okay, and it's not. And we need to be better at this. We got to catch these things in the moment, because we may not get another chance later on. That could be a story where other guys see us laughing at it in the future and they walk away and we never get a chance to let them know that that's not okay. We got to be quicker about this. And like the man that he is, came back and said, holy shit, thank you. I want you to tell me when that kind of stuff is happening. I didn't even think about that. And my goodness, I was a shithead back then. I wish I would have had this. I wish I would have had this kind of conversation available to me back then. Thank you. And the other man that was in that conversation as well said, yep, I felt the same way. I should have said something too. So that was a situation where it was handled and we all got better and the trust has deepened. So there were 4 real life stories that I think give way to 4 guiding principles on how to handle these situations. The first guiding principle is, instead of calling the man out, call him forward. And I realize that I named this podcast How to Call Men Out with Confidence. And that's a misnomer intentionally, because that's the term that we think we need to do, is call a man out. Guys, in my experience, when you call a man out and you make him feel like he's wrong and he feels shamed, he draws his sword and his shield. And then he digs in. 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, he can't hear the message because he feels like you are putting him down, you're shaming him, and men get taught not to back down from situations like that. But if you remember the story I shared in the WhatsApp chat with the man in the Great Man Mastermind, I said, hey, brother, man, I'm just trying to call you forward here to a situation of the standard that we are setting here. Thank you for giving us this awesome moment where we can actually talk more deeply about it. And I invite you to share your feelings about what's coming up for you. And if we need to have a deeper dialogue about this on our Thursday night call, let's do that. But each of these scenarios, that one included, I called the men forward. I wasn't there to put them down or to make them feel like assholes, because I've always seen that calling a man forward allows him to keep his sword and shield down and to hear me at a deeper level. That leads to principle number 2. I always ask, principle number 2, what would Daryl Davis do? Daryl Davis is one of my heroes. I've had him on the podcast. He's the black man who attends KKK rallies. He's the black man who's gotten over 200 KKK members to give up their hatred, their robes, their hoods, to give up their ideologies, to give up their belief system, to give up their communities and their identity. How does a man get to do that? A man, he's someone that he sat down from other people who wanted to kill him, who had probably killed other men with the same skin tone as him. And yet he sat down with these other men and somehow found compassion, patience, and curiosity that over the long haul got 200 men, including like the grand wizard of the Maryland chapter of the KKK, to turn in his robe and his hood, to give up his ideology. And so asking this question of what would Daryl Davis do, Daryl Davis brings an intense amount of compassion to those conversations, because he truly wants to know, how did you learn to hate? Just someone who has a different skin color than you. How did you learn to hate? I'm curious. And so if you can bring a sense of curiosity and compassion to the man who has made that misogynistic comment, each of those situations, I assumed that this man didn't have malicious intent, that he just had a prejudice that was unaware, a blind spot. And if I could come to him with this, hey brother, I'm just trying to call you forward and maybe illuminate something that you didn't know was there. That what would Daryl Davis do? Well, he would have compassion, he would have patience. That has always served me really well, because that's also allowed me to drop some of my anger. It's also allowed me to drop this thing that like, I feel like I have to be a warrior, like I have to go to battle with this guy. I don't want to go to battle with the guy. I actually want conversion. I want him to see the light. And if Daryl Davis can help 200 people, haters, hatred, like hate crimes, like to get them to give up their ideology, then I can get a man who's not nearly as extreme to see the light. So what would Daryl Davis do is principle number 2. Principle number 3 is address the situation even if the moment has passed. Like that last story with my friends, right? I knew something was uncomfortable in the moment. I didn't confront it. I could have said something. I didn't have a well-formed thought, but even though the moment had passed, when I figured out what it was, I brought it back. It's never too late to confront the situation. There's only one thing I would have done differently. If I were back in that situation again, I would have said, you know what, guys? Something doesn't feel right about that story. I don't know what it is right now. Maybe can we just pause for a second? Or even something doesn't feel right about that story, man. Like, I know you didn't say anything like intentionally malicious, but something's feeling off. I may come back to you when I figure out what that is. Are you cool, to hear that? I would have handled it that way. But principle number 3 is like, you can still address it even if the time has passed. And like I said, this situation turned into another beautiful moment for us even when the time had passed. And then principle number 4, don't expect the other man to accept or hear you right away. Don't expect the other man to hear your message or to receive you right away or ever. Like that story I told you about the man with a lot of power, the marketing guy. I don't know. It was unclear if he actually embraced what I had to say or if he just kind of nodded and wanted to get the hell out of the conversation and told me to go fuck myself under his breath later. That's not my job. My job is to be a champion of holding the standard. And so I bring that message to give him an opportunity to rise to the occasion. Whether or not he chooses to do so, I can't control. And so if I can walk into those situations to release the attachment to a particular outcome, I don't have to carry the weight of that. And that allowed me the freedom to actually confront that guy, because I didn't know if he wanted to hear it. It didn't seem like a guy who wanted to hear it. But when I released that expectation of him needing to, then I could do my job of holding that standard. And then I walked away feeling like a great man. So there you guys have it, okay? How to call forward other men with confidence when it comes to misogynistic behavior. And those 4 key principles again: call forward instead of calling out. Ask yourself, what would Daryl Davis do? Address the situation even after the moment has passed, because many times you're not going to feel it until it happens later. But also in that moment, you can buy yourself some time by saying, there was something about what you just said or something about the story that doesn't feel right. I may have to come back to you later, right? To even just like learn to build the habit of nailing it in that moment. And the fourth and final principle is don't expect the man to hear you. Release the attachment. All you need to do is hold the standard and do your part. Now, I've equipped you with all the intellectual information that you will need to call forward another man on his misogynistic behavior. If you are a man who's fully equipped and has got what he needs and can go execute on this, Godspeed to you. That's why I do this podcast. And I'd love to hear your stories. But many of us know that the most challenging part is actually navigating the emotions that come with the confrontation. And so many of you have been asking, what is it that we do in the masterminds? This is the work that we do in the masterminds. We actually have these emotional mastery dojos where we practice situations that kick up fear so that we can feel the fear and then act anyway. So for example, if there's a situation that you've wanted to confront or call forward, but you haven't been able to do so because you're afraid of what you may say or fumble over your words, we work through that in our dojos, in our practices. You feel the fear, you say the stupid thing, you say the wrong thing. It's like a dry run. The more you can get comfortable sitting in that fear, speaking from that place, you will find your stability and your confidence. And then when you call forward other men, it will feel much more natural. It actually feel like a game. It'll feel like a gift to be able to give other men. So if that is something that's appealing to you, I've placed, again, the email address in the show notes, hello@DominicQ.com. And if you reach out to inquire about one of our masterminds, in order to get my attention, you need to let me feel your heart and your soul. Why are you reaching out? What have you tried before? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Why is now the right time? What are the fears that you're dealing with? What are the desires and dreams that you have? At least make me feel you, so that I know that your inquiry is serious. And if your inquiry is serious and you get my attention, then we'll talk.